Okay, so this is 2-5, algebraic proofs. There's a long list of properties that are provided for you. These are the properties that we're going to use to justify what you're learning. Justify. So it'll say justification, or sometimes it'll say reasons in the steps of the proofs. So addition property of equality, that's like if you're solving an equation and it's x minus 4 equals 10. We would do plus 4 to both sides. That's an addition property of equality. So doing that same thing to each side is the equality piece, and the adding is the addition. So for subtraction property of equality, we're subtracting from each side. For multiplication property of equality, you're multiplying from both sides. For division property of equality, you're dividing from both sides. The ones that are different, reflexive is literally the same thing as equal to the same thing. Seems weird, but we actually use that in geometry. For symmetric, they're like opposites. If A is B, then B is A. For transitive, it's usually an if-then statement. Like if this is happening and something else is happening, then this is true. This is the result. And substitution is what we call plugging in. In addition, I want you to write down somewhere the word simplify. And what you're doing when you simplify this is combining like terms or basic math calculations like adding, subtracting, things like that. That would be a simplify as your justification. This will make sense as we do a problem. Okay, so for the first step in a proof, you can always just start with given as your justification. And then you're going to start solving your equation. So it would be minus 1, and you put your solution to that in the next box. So that's what I got when I subtracted 1. The property, since I did minus 1, is subtraction property of equality. If you're going to abbreviate, just make sure it's clear that subtraction is different than substitution. Okay, then our next step for solving the equation would be divide by 3 to both sides. We end up with n equals -2. Since we divided to both sides, that's division property of equality. Okay, so in this next proof, we start with our given, and then we're going to add 8 to both sides. So then we get 4m equals -4. That's addition property of equality since I added to both sides. Now I'm dividing by 4 to both sides, and I get m equals -1. Division property of equality since I divided to both sides. Okay, so this one we're going to plug in 15 degrees for C. So we start with our given, and then when we replace something, when we plug in for a variable, that is called the substitution property of equality. Make sure it's clear that it says substitution and not subtraction. Okay, then when we calculate, when we do regular calculations like 9/5 times 15, and we get 27, and then you add the 32 to it, this can be the same step because it's the same justification. So if you want to go right to the final answer of 59 degrees, you can. Because when you do regular basic math calculations, the justification is simplify. You're just calculating or simplifying it, but you put simplify for a justification. So I put in the answer to the next one. It's very, very similar. So if you want to pause the video, try it, and then take a look at the answer to make sure that you get to that. That's fine. Okay, so you're going to start this problem with your given, of course, and we're going to be substituting in. It doesn't really state what they want us to do here, but let's just go with solve for x. So you're going to plug things in and continue through and solve for x while justifying all of your steps. Pause the video and hit play when you're ready to see the answer. And here is the answer to that proof. Let's move on to the next one. So I did this last proof as well if you want to take a peek at it, but again, it was very similar to the proof before it. So we've been doing property of equality all along because it has equal stuff, but property of congruence is different because it has a congruent symbol. So, okay, so looking here, we have measure of angle 1 equal to measure of angle 1. When they're the same exact thing on both sides, it is reflexive property. But see how it has an equal sign? That means reflexive property of equality. Okay, so then we have XY congruent to VW, so VW is congruent to XY. That's where they like switch places, which is like the symmetric. And it has a congruent symbol, so you would write symmetric property of congruence. Here you have the same thing. You have an angle congruent to the same exact angle, ABC. Nothing about it has changed, and so it's reflexive again. But because it has the congruent symbol, it's reflexive property of congruence. And then the transitive, that's like if something and something else, then something else. That's going to be transitive property, and it has congruent symbols, so it's transitive property of congruence.